I believe you. The wedding dress had belonged to Catherine's mother and her grandmother before that. White lace and silk, carefully preserved, meant to be worn on the happiest day of a woman's life. But as Catherine stood in front of the weathered church in Redemption, Wyoming, the dress felt more like a shroud than a celebration. The townspeople stood in a loose circle around her, watching. Always watching. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold. They'd come to witness not a wedding but a spectacle, the cursed woman trying once again to find someone fool enough to marry her. This was her third attempt. The third time she'd stood in a wedding dress, hope fragile as spider silk in her chest. The first groom had died in a riding accident 2 days before the ceremony. The second had been killed by a falling beam while building their future home. Now people crossed themselves when she walked by. They called her cursed. They said she carried death with her like a shadow. Catherine's hands trembled as she clutched the small bouquet of wildflowers. Her third fiancé, Robert Hayes, stood beside the preacher, his face pale as milk. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the fear. He'd proposed during a weak moment, swayed by her father's offer of land and cattle. But now, standing here with the whole town watching, she could see him wavering. The preacher opened his Bible. The pages rustled in the wind like dry leaves. He began to speak the familiar words, but his voice lacked conviction. Everyone was waiting for something terrible to happen, waiting for proof that Catherine truly was cursed. If anyone objects to this union, the preacher said, his voice carrying across the dusty yard, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Catherine held her breath. She could feel Robert's hesitation beside her like a living thing. His hand, when she'd touched it moments before, had been cold and clammy with sweat. Then she heard it. The sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. Everyone turned to look. A rider was coming fast from the direction of the Thornton ranch, dust rising behind him like smoke. As he got closer, Catherine recognized him. James Thornton, the wealthy rancher's son who'd returned from back east a few months ago. She'd seen him in town a few times, always watching her with those thoughtful gray eyes. James pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the crowd. He dismounted in one smooth motion, his dusty boots hitting the ground with purpose. He was dressed in his good clothes, dark coat and vest, clean white shirt, as if he'd been planning to attend the wedding. But there was something in his expression that said he'd come for a different reason entirely. I object, he said clearly. The crowd murmured, shifting like wheat in wind. Robert looked relieved. Catherine saw with a sick feeling in her stomach. Her third fiancé actually looked grateful for the interruption. James walked through the crowd, people parting before him like water around a stone. He stopped a few feet from where Catherine stood. His eyes met hers, and she saw something in them she hadn't seen from anyone in this town for a long time. Respect. Miss Hayes, he said formally. Then he turned to address the crowd. This woman isn't cursed. She's been unlucky, yes. She's suffered losses that would break most people. But calling her cursed? He shook his head. That's just fear talking. Fear and superstition and small-minded thinking. 2 men died trying to marry her, someone shouted from the crowd. That's not bad luck. That's a curse. Accidents happen, James said firmly. Horses bolt. Beams fall. That's life on the frontier. It's dangerous for everyone, not just the people connected to Catherine Hayes. He paused. My own father died from a heart attack at 45. Was that a curse? Or was it just the way things sometimes are? The crowd was quiet now, listening. James turned back to Catherine. She saw Robert quietly slipping away through the crowd. His chance to escape finally arrived. She should have felt humiliated. Instead, she felt oddly calm, as if a weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. Miss Hayes, James said softly, so only she could hear. You deserve better than someone who marries you out of obligation or for land. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are, not what you supposedly bring with you. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. And what am I? She whispered. Everyone here thinks they know. You're strong, James said. You've faced loss and grief and kept standing. You've endured their whispers and their superstitions, and you've never let it make you bitter. That takes courage. He paused. You're also kind. I've seen you help Mrs. Porter with her groceries. I've watched you tend to sick animals at your father's ranch. You have a good heart. You've been watching me? Catherine asked, surprised. James smiled slightly. Everyone in this town watches you, Catherine. But I think I'm the only one actually seeing you. The preacher cleared his throat. Mr. Thornton, if you're objecting to this wedding, you need to state your reason. James turned to face the preacher and the remaining crowd. I'm objecting because the groom doesn't love her, because he's marrying her out of duty, not choice. And because, he took a breath, because if anyone's going to marry Catherine Hayes, it should be someone who believes in her, someone who knows that what she carries isn't a curse. It's just life with all its pain and randomness and sorrow. He looked back at Catherine. Someone like me. The crowd erupted in whispers. Catherine felt the world tilt slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying I believe you're not cursed, James said quietly. I'm saying I've watched you for months trying to work up the courage to approach you, but you were always engaged to someone else, and I'm not the kind of man who interferes. But this? He gestured at the scene around them. This isn't right. You standing here like you're on trial. Him, he nodded at where Robert had disappeared, looking for any excuse to run. You don't know me, Catherine said, even as her heart began to beat faster. Then let me get to know you, James replied, not as a cursed woman, not as someone people whisper about, just as Catherine, the woman who loves horses and sunrise and has a laugh I've heard exactly twice, both times from a distance, and both times it made me stop whatever I was doing just to listen. Catherine looked at him, really looked at him. She saw sincerity in his gray eyes. She saw respect in something that might, given time, grow into more. I don't need saving, she said firmly. I know, James replied. I'm not offering to save you. I'm offering to stand beside you while you save yourself from other people's superstitions. The preacher shuffled awkwardly. The crowd watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Catherine looked down at her wedding dress, stained now with dust and dirt from standing in the yard. She thought about her 2 dead fiancés, about all the grief and guilt she'd carried. She thought about Robert, already gone, another man who couldn't see past the town's stories to the truth. Then she looked at James Thornton, standing there in his good clothes, offering her something she hadn't dared hope for. Not rescue, not pity, just belief. I believe you, he'd said. 3 simple words, but they changed everything. Catherine took a breath. Then she pulled off her veil, the white lace catching the breeze. She dropped it on the ground at her feet. Take me home, she said to James, not to marry. Not yet, but maybe to talk. Maybe to see if belief is enough to build something on. James smiled. Belief in time, he said. That's all anyone needs. He offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked through the crowd of watching townspeople, past their whispers and their judgment, toward his horse and the promise of a future built on truth rather than fear. Behind them, the preacher closed his Bible with a soft thump. The cursed wedding was over, but something else, something truer, was just beginning.